Hi everyone, this is Chapter 1, Case Management, Definitions and Responsibility for Counseling 4000. So as an introduction, we want to do some definitions so you understand the process and also the terms that are being used. All right, case management, process of assessing a person's total situation and addressing those needs. Assessment is a procedure to better understand a client's problems and determine their services needed. Looking to a person's strengths and interests to improve the overall situation. So, right there, we see is the case management definition, and then also assessment is something that you would do, like an interview, have them fill out a survey or questionnaire. Those would be considered assessments. Primary purpose of case management is to improve the quality of life for your client. So that means examples such as finding safe living arrangements for your client, a psychiatric care. So it means in terms of mentally, everything is going to be looked over or examined or addressed when it comes to your client. And of course, medication for, let's say, diabetes or other disabilities or diseases or whatever the person may have medically focused. All right, so you want to prevent problems from getting worse and costing more money in the future. And this is actually something that we think about when we talk about, like, let's say, universal health care, right? The reason why it is so important to have health care that's affordable is that then people can just go whenever they need to. Okay. And that is when typically the doctors will catch certain things like, oh, I noticed that, your blood pressure is getting a little bit more elevated. Let's work on that. But because in America we do not have that, where we have to pay every time we visit typically, people don't go. So then they don't find out until it's kind of like too late, right? And when someone is requiring that much medical help, it's going to be very costly. So what happens is that the person cannot afford it, right? So that's a conversation they're having in terms of being proactive instead of being reactive. All right, so for example, when it comes to things that might be provided for a client that is going to prevent it from getting worse, one example is Meals on Wheels, which delivers a certain standard of nutrition, which prevents malnutrition and costly medical bills in the future. Right. So if you have food and you're eating, and the food is, let's say, not very unhealthy, then it would be good for you, right? So then hopefully that will make sure that you don't suffer the consequences of not having food. Walking cane, let's say, for example, for a person that will prevent the fall, which would shorten a person's life and potentially cost them a lot because they're going to be going to the hospital because they broke bones and they need to stay there. Neighborhood friend is another option or another thing that you want to consider. That might link that person with a community, alert small problems before they get bigger. So the friend might be able to contact, let's say, the case manager or caseworker, and then from there, let them know, like, oh, this is what's going on with a specific person. And then from there, we can address it before it can potentially get worse. All right, now let's talk a little bit about the history of case management. In the 1980s, so late 1980s, so over 100 years ago, charity organization society did casework to track needs, progress, and changes in each person. Since everyone had needs in common, specific needs could be addressed by a certain person instead of everyone doing every service. So here is something that I want you to make sure you understand. So back then, let's say that you had a client and they had all these problems, right? You might be the person who addresses all of them. And then let's say you see another client and they might have something very similar, then you have to do all of those. So that's a lot of work to do on one person, right? So instead, let's say maybe we have a specialist that goes and talks to them about nutrition, but they can talk to all of those people about nutrition. And then another specialist will be talking all about, let's say, good parenting skills. So when you have all those, then it becomes a little bit more easier and manageable as opposed to one person doing all of this work, okay? And then also by talking to each other, they'll understand, like, oh, I covered this, so you don't have to cover that. So then we don't really duplicate a lot. Okay, in the 1960s, there's this idea called deinstitutionalization. So prior to this time period, if you had a disability, if you were someone who, let's say, was not able to live on your own independently, in the society, you were probably put into some sort of institution, like a mental institution. But in the 1960s, this is when the movement to break down those institutions and then say, let's have the people return back into their communities, because a lot of them probably could live in the community if they had the right supports. Obviously, if you think about Skid Row today in Los Angeles, we're talking about some of the aftermath of that, right? Sorry. So what I want you to think about and understand is, we went from one extreme to another extreme. So maybe, hopefully, maybe in the future, we can do something that meets in the middle. One of the really big issues when we think about homelessness in many parts of America is the fact that a lot of them may need, or many of them may need medication, but as an adult, they can just say no, right? But if they don't get the medication and they're not able to, let's say, make decisions that are best for them, is that considered humane then? So that's something definitely we want to think about, even have a conversation about, because it it's a complicated, nuanced conversation, right? So again, that's what we're talking about when it comes to homelessness or the people who are unhoused. All right, in the 1980s, the word caseworker becomes case manager. So we'll talk a little bit about language in the next slide, but this is what's going on as people are starting to shift from one word to another, because maybe they're like, well, maybe it's really managing as opposed to just doing the work, right? So that's why case manager became popular in the 1980s. They assess needs, find ways to meet those needs, and follow people as they use those services. Shifted to a holistic perspective, looking at all their needs. So holistic is just a fancy word for everything. Okay. Some people might call it like a mind, body, and spirit and community, right? So that's something that you want to start to think about when it comes to, like, maybe when you have all those headaches, it's not just because you just have a headache. It's maybe because you live in a very stressful situation, right? So by addressing the relationships, or maybe you had a fight with your partner and that's why you're starting to develop these headaches, then if we solve that problem in the sense of with the partner, then maybe those headaches will go away and you don't necessarily need medication to get the headaches to go away, right? So in a holistic perspective, we're saying let's look at everything, because everything is really connected with each other. Individualized plans designed for a specific person and not a cookie cutter approach for everyone. So before, we used to think that, everyone should just do exactly the same thing. But as we get more close, more recent in the 1980s, we start to really focus on the idea that we're all really different. We're multicultural, right? But in different ways. And so that means that not everyone will benefit from the exact same methods. Let's look at each person as an individual. That is the movement that starts to happen in the 1980s and goes into the 1990s. All right, let's talk a little bit about language and social services. So terminology wise, we used to call the people that we work with as a professional the patient. And then patient became the word client. And then from client became consumer. So when I was in grad school, like 15 years ago, consumer was pretty popular, right? And then what happened, though, is certain words just get negative connotation. So client and consumers became seen as kind of negative. Like they didn't necessarily like that definition because it seems as though we were saying that that they were like needy or something like that, right? And so today's language when it comes to the person you're working with is person or individual. But you know what? That is pretty vague as well, right? So that means sometimes when you're writing and you just say the person, people are going to go, wait, who's the person? Is that the client? So really the client is now coming back to more popularity again, or coming back to being used again. And that's something that you want to think about. Don't take any of this stuff too seriously in the sense like, you're going to rule, and yell at people by saying, oh, you can't say that or you can't say this. Words will go back and forth and change. Okay. So I have seen people really going back to the word client again. It becomes a little bit more neutral because patient sounds more medical, right? But client seems to be a little bit more professional sounding. Consumer, a lot of people thought, well, what are they consuming? Like eating, right? And it's not really that. So sometimes people start to go, oh, I don't know about this, right? So just in general, language changes all the time. Just think about slang, Gen Z slang, Gen Alpha slang. Sometimes you'll see words that you all use as a younger person. Let's say the word bop, right? Bop is like a song that's really good. Bop is not a new word. Bop was a word from the, I believe, 1950s or 60s. So that's a boomer term that's now being used again. So again, things cycle in and out because of definitions and connotation, which is basically the feeling of a word. So definitely those things will change. All right, so why do we use case management? There's two purposes. Number one, determine an individualized service plan for each person and monitoring it for effectiveness. So what happens is you're going to develop a specific, unique treatment plan for a person and then see how it works. Number two is process used to ensure that money spent is spent wisely. So another thing that's really important is funding. And funding is what's going to pay for these services. Not everyone has money so that they're going to get, they can pay for themselves. Oftentimes they're going to come from different places. So it could come from the government or state and county. That's kind of related to each other. Typically, let's say the government will give money to each state and then each state will decide how it goes. So it's kind of connected that way. Insurance companies, private individuals, so maybe just a client or the family will pay for it, raised by various community agencies, by an organization. So it might be some org that is going to do charity work and then donate money to, or donate services and stuff like that. So it really does depend. So the money that is being used is not just like, endless. So we also do have a responsibility to make sure that everyone is actually getting the money that they are, the worth out of their money, and not to overspend, because that money can go to another person who might need the services as well. All right, there are 4 basic categories of services. There's assessment, planning, linking, and monitoring. So those are the parts that we're going to go and expand next. Some of it is actually quite long and detailed, but overall, if you understand this, then you'll understand what a caseworker does. Assessment. A good assessment is the foundation to understand the problem and guiding treatment and services. In the textbook, it gives you kind of a roadmap, and this is what the roadmap here that you'll see are. So these are the areas that you would want to consider when it comes to finding out information about your client. All right, the initial problem and the background of that problem. That's number 1. Number 2, the person's current situation. So what's going on right now. 3, the person's background in areas such as education, relationships, work history, and legal history. So we're starting to find out a little bit about who they are as a person. 4, what the person needs to make life more stable and to resolve the current problem. 5, the strengths, including those the person brings to the problem and those in the person's environment that would be useful in resolving the situation. So that could be even like family members or friends or partners, someone who can support them. That could be considered a strength. 6, observations about how well the person's function cognitively and any seeming mental problems you have noted. So, it's great and all if you talk to them about the plans that, you have. However, if they don't understand what's going on, so the cognitive part, then it might not become effective, right? Once you actually put it into practice. So you need to also understand, do they understand what's going on, what the conversation is about? And then 7 is recommendations for services or treatment plan for the person. And usually you do that with the person or the client, right? So after you do all this, you're going to create a treatment plan that hopefully you are both very happy with and eager to try out to see what happens. Treatment plans, by the way, don't always work out, right? And it's okay. This is why you're going to do the other parts of this section about, monitoring and stuff, and then changing things and updating or revising things as you go along, because sometimes it just doesn't work, but we don't understand it until we actually try it out. All right, the next step is planning. Develop an initial plan with a client, addresses issues raised in the assessment, and incremental steps towards improvement. So incremental steps is basically baby steps. For example, let's say that you are someone who wants to lose 50 pounds, right? So when you say, I want to lose 50 pounds, it sounds like it's a lot, and it is truly a lot. So if you're measuring it by 50, which is a really high number, you might feel really discouraged after a month or 2 when you still have not lost 50 pounds. So instead, psychologically, it is better for you to do smaller baby steps or incremental. So let's say first month, I want to lose 2 pounds. And as that person goes through the 2 pounds after the first month, and they actually are able to do that, now they're like, you know what? Now I understand what it takes to lose 2 pounds. Let's try 4 pounds next month, right? And then from there, it's much more realistic. And then eventually that 50 pounds will happen, right? But it needs to be incremental so that you don't become discouraged, or your client does not become discouraged. Case managers need to know the resources in the community. And this is very true. Have you ever taken someone else's advice about something that they have never done before? Or go see a movie and then the person goes, I never saw it. But they're like, oh yeah, you should go see it, but I've never seen it. Would you actually do that? Typically not, right? We want to make sure that if you recommend it, it is because you are familiar with them or the organization. Formal agencies are agencies that serve specific needs. They gradually develop contacts to make referrals smooth. So as you meet these people, these organizations, hopefully you're like, oh, I work with, or I have met with Connie, and I recommend that you have a first point of contact with that person. And hopefully she can help you, make sure that you are going to get the needs and services that you're asking for. Here's another example is protective services from domestic violence, mental health treatment agencies, and outpatient treatment programs. So as a professional, you would want to know what is available in your city, your community, right? So that way you can then make these referrals and you can feel somewhat confident that these places are going to help your client achieve their goals. All right, so there is also generic resources. So resources that are available for the common problems that we all have. So this is not a specialist type agency. So for example, let's say you have a client who's a woman with a disability and she's trying to get over the death of her mother, right? So you don't need to find a disability grief support group. You just need to find a support group, because her having a disability doesn't really interfere with the grief component, right? So a woman with a disability might go find a grief support group at a temple that she goes to, or somewhere she knows. A child who needs tutoring, they can go to an after-school program at a church, right? So it's very specific. Sometimes, and typically, I think the churches might not even care what religion that you are. You're just taking the offer of having tutors, right? And then older man who is lonely, he might just go to a community center, because community centers welcome everyone. And then now he can go, have conversations with people and stuff like that. And it's not a specific place that you need to recommend. These are just generic places that are open to everyone. Support groups and educational seminars. For example, a family that's going through family therapy, potentially the family will go to support groups where parents dealing with similar problems can get, together to support each other. Maybe there's something where you all go as a workshop on parenting skills. Okay. Here's another example: is a man who's on probation. He might need to take job readiness workshops, or he might need to go find a support group for ex-offenders trying to change their lives, right? So it's really important for people to be able to find support groups and educational seminars so that they can better themselves as they are going through life. There's also a thing called peer support. So that's a former client is asked by an agency to support others on their road to recovery. So that's quite common. Let's say, for example, someone that was going through addiction, now that they have become sober, maybe they can come back and help other people who are dealing with alcoholism as well. So they can volunteer, they can be an intern, depending if they're going to school, or they can just get paid to do this. A peer that has firsthand experience of the problem. So for some people, some certain types of populations, knowing that the other person has experienced the exact same thing connects with them. Okay, they might not feel like they have to explain everything. So for example, addictions is very common where, can a person who's never been addicted to anything really help a person who's going through addiction? Obviously the answer is yes, but for some people, some clients, they feel like they are a little bit more connected to someone who has gone through it. Same thing happens with military veterans, where sometimes the veteran does not want to talk to someone who has never been in the military. It could also be, the other way around as well, where the military can talk to someone who is actually outside of the military because they don't want that perspective. It really does depend on the person. Okay, The next thing is set realistic and meaningful goals, like we've talked about before. Peer support can offer advice if something does not work. So, as a person who's gone through the same experiences, they might go, yeah, I feel you about that specific thing. It didn't work for me either. Let's talk about some other things that we can potentially do to try out and help you. All right, informal resources and social support systems. People live better in a community where they have healthy social support systems. So, communities that may have places of worship, such as a church or a temple or a synagogue, whatever religion you are. Local organizations. So, again, just in general, maybe it's an LGBT organization, whatever it is. There could be social clubs. So, social clubs are like going out to do things together, right? And then groups with similar interests, so that could be connected with that. And it might be, a group of people who likes to play Dungeons and Dragons or something like that. Whatever it is. Those two things, social clubs and groups, can be kind of intermixed, right? Or interchangeable. Creating an individualized plan. So now we're going to determine where the problems are and what needs attention. Supports and other resources the person has in the community and friends and family. What they do well and interest them the most, but you have to remember everyone is unique, right? So it's not cookie cutter. It's not let's make everyone do the exact same treatment plan, because it's not necessarily going to work for everyone. And you got to think about that and always keep it in the back of our heads. Rank which problems need to be addressed immediately. That's definitely something that you're going to talk about with your client. I always tell people, or let's say when I talk to a client, I might say something like, give me a couple of things why you would like, or what you would like to fix or work on, right? And let's say they give out 3 things. Then I'm going to ask them, can you rank it? What is the most important thing? And then from there, we'll work on that first. And if it's going well, we might then add a second one to it. If not, at least we're getting the big problem addressed first and then hopefully resolved. All right, now we're going to go to the next level, which is the linking component. So, that's connecting clients to people or agencies where they will receive the services that they need. We make referrals to formal agencies. Referrals is, typically in case management when you have to do some paperwork as well, because it is from one agency to the other. Maybe it's because of billing or some other reason why, but you would potentially and possibly and most likely use paperwork to do this. Why are you making the referral? So you need to write that down and justify it. Problem for which the referral is being made. Goal that you expect of your client will achieve with the agency, and the amount of time to reach that goal. So you want to give specific expectations about achieving a specific goal. Time, what it is, all that stuff, so that the other person understands, the other agency knows and understands, and can also anticipate how it's going to happen. Sometimes, though, a client is reluctant to go, so you may have to go with them. So when you refer them to a specific place, they might go, I don't know if I want to go. But they will go if you go with them, okay? So you might need to do that a couple of times until they feel a little bit more comfortable. And then from there, maybe they can go on their own. The agency may not appear interested in serving your client. You will need to advocate for that client. So if they deserve to be there, then you need to stand up for them if the other place or the other group of people might not necessarily feel as friendly. And you got to explain to them. And you got to be charismatic. You got to be nice. You got to be charming and stuff like that. I know you're like wondering, why do I have to do all of that? Well, if you're saying you're an advocate, if you're saying that you're helping people, this is part of the job. Some places do not need a referral to know that the client has any problems or needs to know that they have any problems. They're just welcoming people to attend these events. So like that community center that we were talking about before, they don't need to know if your client has depression, right? They just need to know that there's places open for bingo or whatever it is, and you can come in and play bingo with us, and that's it. And then the last component of this section would be monitoring. So case managers has responsibility to monitor the services given to your client. So how do you do that? You could be invited to a planning or treatment conference about your client at a specific agency that you've referred them to. Receive written reports about the client's progress and services given. So, they'll send you a weekly or monthly letter or note, email, letting you know how that person's going or what they're doing and stuff like that. You can contact them if there's no regular communication. You're like, hey, I want to just check in, right? Remember, there is financial components to all of this as well, and also time. Keep track of the client's progress towards your goals and that you develop with your client, and then be aware of the modifications or revisions. So let's say that they work with a specific client agency at another place, and then things were changed, right? We need to understand why those things were changed or revised and stuff like that, so that we understand what's going on with them. All right, now the term is advocacy. To be an advocate, what you're doing is basically you're going to help plan the services with your client. You're going to stand up for them when their voices need to be heard. You want to link the clients to specific services in the community. You want to help them find the best placements and treatments. And then, of course, you want to monitor their goals to make sure that they're being achieved. So when you do all those things, you're advocating for your client. In the real world, here's an example, is going with your client to a hearing and a courts, in the courts, testify on their behalf, insist that they get a fair hearing, assembling facts to present, going to meetings, and then potentially also seeking legal aid for them, right? So that would be considered advocacy in this field. Service coordination. So that is working with other agencies in a person's life. Clients may be in various programs that have different specific goals. So when talking about service coordination, we're coordinating all these different services, right? So that could be within the school, within mental health systems, disability systems, criminal justice systems, substance abuse systems, and then also healthcare systems. So caseworkers, when you are working with all these people, you might realize that some of them don't really welcome you because they're closed from outside input and collaboration. So what that is saying is that they got it under control. So they don't need other people coming in and forcing them to change certain things. They have a certain way of doing it, and you probably knew about that as well. So you might talk to your client outside of that and say, how's everything going? And hopefully they'll say, and let you know that everything is going well. You don't necessarily talk to them as much, the agency. It doesn't mean that they're bad people at all. So again, it depends on the agency and how they work. Each party has to feel that what is being agreed to will have a successful outcome for the system that they represent. So again, maybe even though we don't get to talk to that agency a lot, right? We will know what the progress is. Case managers will also avoid duplications of services by doing this. Textbook has two examples, LaShonda and Philip, where they talk about service coordination. All right, levels of case management. There are typically 3: administrative, resource coordination, intensive, but additionally, there's one called blended case management or targeted, okay? And we'll explain what these things are. So typically 3, but really there's 4 that really does exist, okay? So let's talk about the first one, administrative case management. So these are when you have a client who is very high functioning, who needs very little assistance navigating the system. So although they do need services, once you recommend everything, they're like pretty good with it. They might need to make a phone call so that they can get their prescriptions refilled, or they might have an emergency appointment for some reason that's came out of nowhere. Return to outpatient substance abuse treatment, so that's returning after they've gone through the whole thing. They're basically capable of handling things themselves, okay? So in this one, you might have a caseload that's a higher number because there are people who don't necessarily need a lot of services, right? You want to just check in on them. The next one is called resource coordination. So these are people who have some trouble handling the details of their treatment plan. So there's certain parts that they're confused about, or they just don't understand, or for some reason they just cannot get through it. So these are people who usually need your help, involved in chronic difficulties that require more assistance. So chronic is just a fancy word for long term, okay? So maybe it is diabetes or something like that. And they sometimes do need additional help when it comes to, their medications and stuff like that. And nutrition. Do not pose a risk to themselves or other people. Generally, once you're able to show them, they're like, okay, I got it, right? They're good with supports, but do not need necessarily a lot of hospitalization. So they might go in there every once in a while because of, who they are as a person. They're a little bit more at risk, but not necessarily severe. Generally, they do well with housing, medication, and therapy, so they're able to do those things and be fine, right? But they do need help more often than the previous group. The last section is called intensive case management. So this requires considerable supervision, support, and assistance to live in the community. So these are people who potentially could need 24-hour help or access to help if they're living within the community. Okay, they live in a way that does not make their problems worse. So what you need to figure out is, how do we make sure that they don't stress themselves out or whatever it is, and then potentially harm themselves. Caseloads for the intensive case management is generally the smaller one of the three that we've been talking about, because it requires much more personal, individual attention. They have high risk of repeated emergencies and hospitalizations. They risk of deteriorating, which is basically kind of like falling apart, and becoming a risk to themselves or other people. Maybe they need 24-hour case management and with intense involvement. Obviously, you as a client, or I'm sorry, you as the, let's say the caseworker, you are not expected to be on call 24 hours a day, but there'll be a team of people, right, for different times. And of course, avoid situations that trigger stress and relapse for your client. So we just talked about those three. However, there's this thing called a blended case management or targeted case management. And the word blending, obviously, you're talking about is mixing three things together, right? So different ways of delivering services. Instead of dividing caseloads by levels of need, case managers are given a variety of levels who carry a smaller caseload. So you might have less people, but you're going to have a little different levels of it. And why that happens is then you can actually follow people. So if you're going from one level to the next and then back to the other level again, let's say level 2, they go to level 3, and then after interventions, they go back to level 2 again. So it's one case manager for this client for this entire time. Whereas the other one, once you get out of your section, it will go to someone else. Okay, the same way, the same case manager when a client goes from resource coordination to intensive and then back. An example in the book is for a person named Julie. Case management in provider agencies. So some work in large agencies while others work in smaller agencies known as provider agencies. Provider agency provides specific services to a client such as shelters, food banks, fuel assistance programs, and then daycare centers for older adults. So those we consider provider agencies because they're providing services, right? Specific experiences, so it could be for someone who has experienced rape or sexual assault, domestic violence, or just looking for a job readiness, right? Because they're smaller agencies, they might be able to also provide some counseling. And in the textbook, they have a person named Janine who goes through this example, okay? But again, it doesn't necessarily mean that your caseworker will be providing counseling. Separating case management from therapy. So here's what I just talked about in the previous slide. Case management is not therapy. This is why undergraduates in the rehab, and psychology and stuff like that can become case managers, because typically you're not doing counseling or therapy. Counseling requires a master's degree, typically. Okay. When you meet a client, you may discover some deep-seated problems. So when you meet them, you're like, oh man, this person does have a lot of problems. And so you're going to probably get to know them a little bit and understand and hear them talk about these things. This will become the basis for the plan that will be developed to address these problems, and refer to experts in the field. So that therapy part will be going to specific places for your client. So they might go to addictions agency with a counselor there, and then talk and work through that there. The client may call you if there is a crisis and the therapist is not available. So in emergencies, you might become kind of like a therapist to them at that moment. Most likely you're going to be talking to them and comforting them and letting them know, everything will be okay, hopefully, right? But let's take it one step at a time. Do not panic. Do not, go and, to something that's not healthy or dangerous potentially. Some of your clients do not need or want therapy. They just want services and access to medication. So again, just because you have a client with a problem doesn't mean that they actually want therapy. Maybe they've gone through therapy already, and now they realize, that's not going to work, but the medication is going to work now. Okay, the next section we're talking about is called managed care and case management. So, managed care is the financial system developed to handle the costs of healthcare. It could be private or public funding. We've talked a little bit about funding before. So, what this is when it comes to the career is you could become part of the managed care organization or MCO. So, typically, an MCO will receive a certain amount of money from, again, private or public funding. Then they're going to allocate these based on a specific number of clients. So let's say your agency says they're going to service 50 people, right? So then this money comes in for those 50 people. The MCO will hire case managers who oversee the care given to prevent costs from going over. So from here, it's kind of like we know that every person gets a certain amount of money, right? And we do not want to go over that. Often has specific protocols, decision trees to help make decision. So your client might want full hospitalization, but maybe that's going to be too expensive. So it might be something of a partial hospitalization, or maybe an agency that will take them in. That's not necessarily hospitalization. It might sound scary, it might sound difficult, but they also are running everything through a specific budget that's limited so that everyone can get access to these services. So because of that, when a client needs to go somewhere, they might need pre-authorization before they can actually receive those services there. So some services are costly, which means that the MCO case manager will want to approve it before it happens. Okay, so the next part we're talking about are models. So just like everything else, models can adjust, can change. I just want you to keep that in mind as we go through these, because these have gone through an evolution of what they are today from what it was previously. So the first model that we're going to talk about is called the recovery model. So the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Office of SAMHSA, which is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration, some of y'all might end up working there or doing internships there, changed the view of the mental illness and substance abuse from a life of chronic illness to one of recovery and productive life. So what you hear there, let me read it again, change the view of mental illness and substance abuse from a life of chronic illness to one of recovery and productive life. So what this is doing is it's reframing it, right, to make it much more positive. So because the reality is, although people might go through addiction, they can also, deal with it, become sober, and then become happy, prosperous, and productive people. Okay, so we're reframing it to be much more optimistic as opposed to, you've been going through alcoholism. Well, that's all you can do. You're never going to get any better. Obviously, that's not true, right? Although some people might think that is true. So we're trying to now change that image. And SAMHSA is trying to do that specifically with their recovery model. It's based on many people's experiences of recovering from addiction, mental illness, and emotional problems and living productive lives. So the recovery model has 4 major dimensions of recovery. The first one is health. So we want to make sure that you're managing your diseases or symptoms and making informed, healthy choices that support physical and emotional well-being. So we want to make sure your health is addressed. The next one is home, to have a stable and safe place to live. The next one is purpose, conducting meaningful daily activities, jobs, school, volunteering, family caretaking, making money, getting independence. Those things are really important to you. And then also community, having relationships and social networks that provide support, friendship, love, and hope. So SAMHSA believes that the recovery model has these 4 dimensions of recovery that needs to be addressed. Okay. People in the recovery are asked to take long-range views, one that is more productive, meaningful, and less stressful. So what that is saying is we want to know also what your long-term goals are, right? What are the bigger picture? So you might ask questions like, well, where are you right now? Where do you want to be in 5 years? How are you going to get there? What are things that you want in your life? What would you want to put in your life if you could? What goals would you like to pursue? What issues do you need to clear up? Where do you feel most comfortable belonging? So maybe certain communities or groups. What treatments do you want to use? So these are questions we want to ask them to find out so that we understand where they are in the bigger picture, in the bigger sense. And also just to talk about when we talk about recovery, relapse. So relapse is not the end of the world. Relapse is similar to getting sick, right? So most of the time you're totally fine, but every once in a while you'll get sick. So, and that can happen once you are living a life of addiction, is that once you try to become sober, sometimes you'll fall and relapse a little bit. But again, you can get better from there again. Okay, the last part of the recovery model is SAMHSA's 10 guiding principles of recovery. So we're going to see these 10 things. We're going to talk about them really quickly. The first thing is to have hope, right? Hope will help start the beginnings of your change or your client's change. 2, person driven, which basically means that the client needs to decide what they want that is healthy for them. You're just there to help and go along with them. Okay. 3, many pathways. So everyone is unique. That means that everyone will have a different way to get to the success that they're looking for. 4, holistic. We talked a little bit about earlier, where basically it's the mind, the body, the spirit, and the community. So looking at everything because they're all connected, right? Let's say that if you're having problems with your partner, that could affect your body because you might get migraines. It might make you not participate in a place of worship like a church or something like that. You might not participate with the community because you're so sad about the relationship component. 5, peer support, which is basically people who get you, understand your lived experiences, and offer you support. 6, relational, surrounded by people who believe in recovery, right? So if you are, let's say, someone who's dealing with alcoholism, you're probably not going to want to hang out with a lot of your old friends who drink a lot, right? So it's about the relationships that you have, the relational part. 7 is culture. So everyone has a different culture, so your value systems are going to be different. We want to learn what they are so that we can work with it. 8, addresses trauma. So something that we realize is that oftentimes when we are doing unhealthy things to our bodies or ourselves, it's probably because something happened to us when we were younger, right? So we want to make sure that we are aware of the trauma that could potentially have worked with us and then work through them and stuff like that with your client so that they can get through it, right? Okay, number 9, strengths, responsibilities, have a strong community foundation to start. So again, what are the things that are going to make you stronger? Who will support you? And that could be the community and stuff like that. And then you start from there and then you go forward. And then 10 is respect, protect rights and fight discrimination. So respect is about, making sure that everyone is treated equally and fairly and stuff like that. Models for children is the next theoretical thing that we're talking about. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services has an area or a department called the Child and Adolescent Services System Program, or CASSP. So their focus when it comes to models is children-centered and family-focused. So we want to be respectfully focused on each child as a person and then include the families of those children as a valued partner in the planning for this child. Community-based services that keep children at home or in their community is really important. We even talk about that when we talk about foster youth, right? Is you want to keep them within the family first and foremost, and then in the same schools and environments because a lot of change could potentially traumatize a child, okay? So SAMHSA has a resiliency model when it comes to working with children. So at-risk children are often bounce back when they have someone in their lives who make it clear that they are important regardless of the past. So just to have that positive influence is really important with kids. Case managers can offer that. Family members, teachers, youth counselors, and even their neighbors can offer those things. Also, just to let you know, children benefit from reading and being read too. Okay, because that's going to help them with their thinking and their cognitive abilities as they age and go through school. They also have opportunities where the kid can give to others, be helpful, and show concern for others. So oftentimes children can be, let's say, children who are seeking services or need services have never been allowed to do anything or care for other people. They've been yelled at, they're scared and all that stuff. So giving them an opportunity to practice these things, to practice their morals, to practice, kindness and stuff will hopefully help them bounce back from the traumas that they've experienced. Okay, models for those with intellectual disabilities. So, Self Determination or Everyday Lives is this program that will help people, these clients, have personal choices for the life that is most meaningful to them. So, obviously, people with disabilities, some of them are very severe, whereas other ones are not as severe, right? But with the severe ones, uh, maybe they realize that there are limits to what they can do, right? So let's ask them what they can do and then allow them to do those things. Case managers collaborate with the family to see how best money can be spent on the client in a way that doesn't waste it, right? Like we've talked about before with just a typical client as well, is that there's a certain amount of money that is being spent on everyone. So we want to make sure that the money is spent well when we ask the client with a disability what they want to do. We often hear the term infantilizing, which is basically treating people with disabilities like children, right? And telling them exactly what they need to do instead of asking them what they want to do or what they can do. And that's something that we're trying to break down when it comes to family treatments of people with disabilities. Now let's move on to the physical health as part of being well. Okay, so we talked a little bit about holistic approach. Obviously, the health is one of them. Importance of looking at a person's health as a whole. You need to have regular physical checkups. You also need to deal with your chronic conditions that are being monitored by healthcare professionals. Chronic conditions, again, is just a fancy word for long-term conditions like diabetes or high blood pressure or something like that. Your health, obviously, is going to be affected by the employment that you do. So depending on some jobs are kind of dangerous, right? Let's say, for example, mining in a cave, let's say, for minerals or whatever, or coal, you can get cancer from doing that, right? When you are working as a radiologist inside a hospital, you're being exposed to basically radiation. And that can also cause cancer, which is why they get paid a lot, right? Childcare, affordable health care, access to medical care, food security. Food security is basically a fancy word of having food, transportation, housing, and then utilities as well. So all those things can be affected, or your health can be affected by them. Poverty is highly correlated with poor health outcomes and higher risks of premature death. So again, we're trying to make sure that you live as long as possible in a healthy way. There are centuries of racism in America as a key driver for health inequities within communities of color. So just think about where most community of colors exist. They're often close to areas of high pollution, such as freeways and stuff like that. Maybe the city that they live in doesn't necessarily monitor health stuff, codes and stuff like that. Maybe it's a lot dirtier. It doesn't get cleaned up. There's a lot more fast food. All those things are part of what has happened over the centuries when it comes to racism. Okay, so it can affect your housing. Maybe your housing is not built recently, so it's really old, it's falling apart. Your education, there might be a lack of that. There's no money, there's no wealth for opportunities, and potentially because of racism, you don't get the jobs just because of the skin color or how you look, right? So all those things are part of your healthy wellness that we need to also address as well. All right. The next part is telehealth communications. The pandemic made us go online, right? Some agencies still use the internet to this day when it comes to, let's say, Zooming or whatever with that person. But we also want to make sure that HIPAA laws are not being crossed, okay? And HIPAA is Health Insurance Portability and Affordability Act, which is basically the protection of your records and the documents through, let's say, the fax machine, through emails, through the computer, right? Or it's a digital version nowadays. You also can meet people online synchronously, so with your your caseworker face to face, or asynchronously, which is basically something like emails. It's not the same time. You can both just fill it out or respond to an email or text whenever you are close to your computer, or you can sit down and talk to them. The next part is the National Digital Inclusion Alliance 5's elements. So we want to make sure that the internet is fair for everyone as well. So number one is internet-enabled devices that meet the needs of the individual user. So make sure that you have access to it, and also the internet is properly, normal or fine, right? They're not slow, does not lag and stuff. Two, affordable, robust broadband services. So again, kind of similar to the previous one, which is broadband is just, the internet and access to it and how much you can search and stuff like that when it comes to, does it go out all the time and stuff like that. Three, access to digital literacy training. So again, to be able to understand the technology. Four, technical support. What happens when you do have problems with the internet? Who is going to help you with all of that? And five, applications and online content design to enable self-sufficiency, collaboration, and participation. So we want to make sure that the apps, which is what applications are actually helpful to you. It's not too confusing. It's not too hard to use and stuff like that. And then caseloads. Let's just talk about the size, and because size matters, right? So large caseloads can diminish the quality of care and reduce the contacts between the case manager and the clients. So what that is saying is, if you have a lot of people on your caseload, you're not necessarily providing with the most one-on-one help or care, right? I've heard people say that they have 350 caseloads. Obviously, not all those are people who need services every day. It actually could be, remember those the three levels and then the targeted version or the blended version? Maybe it's a mixture. Maybe it's just one group where it's very high functioning. But we want to talk about the fact that too large of a caseload, the case managers are really only reacting to them when they're in trouble, right? And when they're in trouble is like basically the last opportunity to resolve this, right? When we first see it, it would have been great to address it then. But if it's a lot, people are not going to be able to see everyone. It's not a stable relationship because of that. And case managers can feel overwhelmed because they have 350, 500 cases. And they start to freak out. They start to panic. They start to feel upset, overwhelmed, and stuff like that. So, and the reason why this happens, though, is because there's a limit on how much money a company has. How many can they pay to work with all these clients? It might be a very limited. We can only pay for, let's say, 5 case managers when we really need 8 managers or 10 managers. And of course, the complexity of the cases as well, too, right? Some of them are going to be complicated, whereas some of them are going to be easy. So when people say, is there a ideal case number or a number of cases for a caseload? The answer is there is no ideal number of cases. All right, we're done with this chapter. Bye.